that I have and some of what I've sprinkled in here is really in alignment. And so that's pretty cool to see. I'll try to call some of that out. And so my caveat is that I worked for an agency. I spent over 8 years at agencies, but I'm certainly not representing the full agency perspective. I'm just representing some of it. Because agencies are kind of like the Wild West still, which is why people like me, I think, enjoy them so much, is that we're working on 10 different things in a day. And by different, I mean really different. Downside of that is there's never enough time. There's never enough resources, and everybody's a stakeholder. And there's stakeholders from every different client we work with who have different needs and different requirements and different issues. And so it's a constant juggling act. So it's kind of fun, but at the same time, it can be really frustrating and burn some people out. But that's all I was saying. I just picked out a variety of things around the challenges I've seen in agencies and how we work and who we work with that hopefully some of it will spark some thoughts or some ideas with you. Maybe you'll learn something, or at least take an idea that you can figure out more on your own. But these are the kinds of challenges I see, and I had to put a cat in here because I'm hoping the presentation will go viral. And so I noticed that Abby had cats in hers too. She had more cats, so I probably won't. But so the challenges I'm going to talk about are around the tools we use, the time we have, the teams we deal with, the audiences we have for our wireframes and other deliverables, and the variety of different kinds of projects and different kinds of clients that we have to deal with. First of all, let's talk tools. I've got logos. You recognize the logos? Do you recognize anything? Who here uses Actuary? A lot of people. Not surprised. Who here uses OmniGraph? All right, Mac people represent. Who here uses Visio? Anybody want to admit to it? Yeah? All right. What about Illustrator? People wireframe Illustrator? And does anyone wireframe in PowerPoint? Excellent. Hey, I won't judge you. I have a set of Windows 8 stencils to wireframe PowerPoint. And they also connect to Visual Studio so that you can import your designs into that, which we haven't done yet, but we could if we wanted to. And so the reason I put all these up here is that my team uses all of these on various projects for various reasons. Sometimes it's kind of insane. We're moving toward more Axure, but the reality of the world is that we oftentimes need to quick mock something up and print it. We don't need to make the prototype. We don't need to do a bunch of detailed requirements around it. We just need to get a piece of paper on somebody's desk. And Axure kind of makes that so simple. So we have other tools we use. We have clients we work with, like 3M, who they're changing now, but in the past they've used Visio in-house, and their team wants us to be able to provide them sometimes with source files in Visio, so we use Visio for them. OmniGraph is, well, we've got some people who are hardcore Mac users, and if they want to use a Mac, I'm not going to stop them, so they get to use OmniGraph as long as they can prove to me that they can translate it into a good PDF. So my perspective on tools is that a good craftsman can use a variety of tools, and these aren't that different. Well, maybe hand sketching is, but everybody should be able to do hand sketching like we were just talking about. So let's talk about time and routine. I love that we just talked about workshopping so much, because that was one of the big things that I've been using successfully as well in an agency perspective. It's a little bit of a different sell to try to talk a client into spending the time and money and hours to bring a bunch of people together. But I think one thing from the agency perspective that I found that's really valuable that we can do is we can be the outside people who help bring those stakeholders together that they may not have even thought about it, and they might even push back against someone internal. But when you've got a project, you're sold, you're representing, and you're dealing with the agency who's charging you a bunch of money, then you probably are more likely to actually come together, and we can be a catalyst for that change. So the other things that we try to do to deal with our time constraints, and they are crazy. I mean, everyone says time is an issue, but that's, I think, among my biggest complaints about agency life is that we never have time to do as good a job as we would really like. And so we have to find creative ways to get around that. And not only that, but we're trying to maintain a high amount of billable time on our client projects because we don't have the luxury of necessarily being able to spend like 3 years working on something. It's usually about 20% of the time we really like to spend on it, and then we're juggling out the other projects daily. So time's a big issue, but what I think really works well for time management around, or time, being more efficient with time around UX and wireframing is to start collaboratively. This could be internal if you're in an agency or with the client in the form of workshops, but what I find really works well for collaborating is kind of some of the workshopping techniques that Abby was talking about, where you get people together, you make sure everyone is drawing, sketching, throwing out ideas, but you don't necessarily think that every idea that comes up in collaborative sessions is a good idea. There's a flux to it. There's a coming together and ideating, and then there's going apart and refining. And then you come together and ideate, and it goes back and forth like that. And so if you think of that rhythm, that's a really good way to do it. And it seems like it's added time up front when you can just be coding. But what it seems to accomplish, though, is to not only get all the ideas, or a lot of the ideas, on the table right away that might come up later to derail or add time, but it also starts producing some stuff that you can give to people and show people, and developers can start using right away. So that's one technique we use a lot. Plus, you might not believe it, but even in an agency of well over 100 people, we have some severe silos. And our silos are even within the kind of creative teams of people who are doing UX and doing design and doing copy. And so collaboration helps break that down right away and get everyone on board. And so sketching is another thing I wanted to mention too. That's what you see off to the right on there is a sketching technique that I really like, that is not just basic sketching, but kind of component sketching, where you can do this with a team too. This is a great thing to do in workshops or in collaborative sessions if you've got some designers and copy folks and whoever else involved, is give them paper, give them scissors, or give them a bunch of post-it notes. If you've got corkboard and a Gage, we have like walls and walls of this stuff for whatever reason. But we make good use of it by doing things like this, because now we're helping the team understand information design and interaction design at a slightly higher level. Because they start thinking about how pieces interrelate, and they start thinking about information hierarchy in a way that they don't if they're just drawing on one piece of paper. So I think that's kind of a cool side of it too. What you see down below is just kind of one of our workshop sessions. And one thing I wanted to mention, I think it was to your question earlier about bringing in that user perspective into those, and how do we work with personas and research, and how do we make sure that we're not just serving the business, even when we have a bunch of business stakeholders together, but we're actually serving the users' needs too. There's a lot of techniques you can use for workshopping. A lot of the ones that I found really successful are around the concept of game storming, which is the idea of kind of gamifying a workshop. And so one of the techniques in game storming that is especially effective is one called empathy mapping. And the idea here is that if you know what the personas already are, and mind you, they should not be your standard marketing personas, they're all about segmentation. You put some big post-it pads up on the walls, draw a little stick figure on them, and then you divide them into different spaces. I don't have an example here, I wish I would have thought of that earlier. But the idea is that you're getting the users or personas right up in front of everybody, all your stakeholders you're working with. And then you put in each of those sections you've just sectioned off on your piece of paper, you put things like hearing, seeing, thinking, feeling, doing, and then those define the spaces. You give everyone post-it notes, and then you have them just put down what they think this person is hearing, seeing, thinking when they're dealing with the website or whatever it is you're creating. Where are they getting their information? What are they seeing? What are they hearing? Who are they hearing from? What are they thinking? What are they feeling when they're interacting with this? And so that starts to suddenly get everyone empathizing with your users. That's the name of empathy mapping. If you don't have personas, it's also a good way to solicit that kind of information from your stakeholders and try to get started on your user research that way. Here's another thing that we users to kind of bring everything together and deal with the problems of time and efficiency, and that is a copy doc. So I started doing IA back in the 90s when we didn't have as much specialization or diversification of talents as we do now. And so back then, the IAs that I worked with just did it all. We wrote all the copy, we put everything together. We didn't have a content strategist because we kind of did that, but we were wearing so many hats we couldn't do any of it super well. So the evolution of copy and IA that I've seen has come into this really cool space where we have different documents that serve different purposes but play really well together. I've been really lucky to work with a really brilliant content strategist named Erin Johnson, and she's developed these copy docs based on wireframes. So essentially she takes the core wireframe like you can see over on the left there, and then she sort of mocks it up just really basically in Microsoft Word actually. She's a wizard with that thing. And then that defines the spaces that the copy can go in, and it helps people kind of understand how the copy will flow and interrelate in the different places. It gives some basic feel for how big your blocks of copy can be, so that you're, as a writer, able to kind of process that better. And it's great for stakeholders to review too, because they can see the copy in context rather than just seeing it in a big flow, and it gives them a lot more feel too. All right, so let's talk about the challenges around different audiences that we have to deal with in agency life, and you do too. Well, okay, this is going to be a little hard to see, so let me set it up with a little bit. So when we deal with our stakeholders, oftentimes they question, like, well, we just want to see the design. And when you're an agency, it's sometimes difficult to sell in all the IA because they just want to see the final product. And they don't want to wait. They don't want, even if you show them a project plan where you've got all the different phases of wireframing and gaining fidelity as you go, they don't understand why you have to do all that. And so you can argue with them, try to convince them, sometimes it works. But another thing that I found works really well is to insert some more in-process deliverables that even come kind of before some of the original sketching that Adam was talking about, or concurrently with it, but we're revealing something that's valuable to the client. And so what this is kind of showing, and you're not seeing the whole picture, is a full documented process from strategy into wireframing. And so we started by doing some strategic thinking around who are the users, what are their different needs at the different phases of interaction we're going to have with this website over time, and then what are their main goals in each of those phases, and then what are the business goals. We lined those all up, and then we started to show consecutively how that then starts revealing some potential wireframe layouts and initial sitemaps where we've got the user goals and the business goals mapped to different pages. And by showing them all the things that we naturally are doing behind the scenes to figure out what goes on in wireframe, they suddenly see a lot more value, and they understand how to look at a wireframe a lot better because they've been along for the ride, seeing this whole process come to life. And it's also really valuable in the softer side to try to help get people involved in thinking about the process and realizing what's all going into creating these things that you're showing them. And so it's kind of a cool way to really engage stakeholders. So this is pretty standard looking wireframe, I imagine, to most people. But I've blown up one area on here because this is another way that we deal with the diversity of audiences, because we oftentimes have to have a single wireframe that speaks to developers and speaks to stakeholders. And how do we do that? I think we can do it with detailed annotation that still has a few special little features that really bring that stakeholder understanding into the picture. And so this shows a blowout of the notes that are describing that hero area up there. And so what we're doing here is not just having some detailed kind of behavioral notes, but we're also bringing in the business goals that you see in those boxes, and we're bringing in a key that shows the key types of users, which are on a chart on a different page. I'm not showing you guys, but we show which users are really being satisfied, which goals of theirs are being satisfied with each of the sections. And so those are the sorts of things that start to really gain some understanding and make the heads nod of our stakeholders. Well, we can still then couch in there a whole bunch of detailed annotations for developers. All right, so a variety of projects. I just picked one example because I think it's kind of interesting, and we've innovated a couple new things on it, and that's Windows 8. So Windows 8 is an entirely new way of designing user interfaces that Microsoft has engineered the heck out of, for better or for worse. And since we do a ton of business with Microsoft, I'm not going to say more than that, but I was lucky enough to get user interface training from Microsoft on how to design Windows 8. And so even with that, though, there was a lot of gaps, because they explain like what's a charm bar, and semantic zoom and all that. Well, that's great, but how do you document all that? How do you turn that into something that somebody can understand? And Microsoft, one of their big challenges as a company is that they don't position things for people outside of Microsoft to understand. They position things for people inside Microsoft to understand. And so we were having a conversation earlier this evening about how poorly named the Microsoft Surface tablet is, and how the one that's supposed to compete with iPad is called Surface RT. I know that's like the name right there, but Microsoft is to think about how people are going to consume the name internally, and they do the same thing with their Windows 8 design training. So they're like, look at all this cool stuff, and this is amazing, it's different, it's world-changing. How do you document it? I don't know. So we had to figure out ways to document it. So this is a sitemap type thing that we created to document what a Windows 8 flow might look like. So we've got some of these sitemap elements on there. We've got the numbering, we've got sub-pages, we've got some hierarchy of screens shown by the indentations with a few annotations. But then the other thing we have is with Windows 8, you've got this long horizontal scrolling canvas that you can work with, which, apart from the fact that it breaks some of the core tenets of usability that we've all lived with for the last 15 years, is a totally new thing to try to design for. How do you show what a contiguous scroll looks like? So this is what we came up with to try to start doing it. I imagine anyone else who's done Windows 8 may have kind of thought of something similar. But I think it's useful because it shows the perspective of a viewable screen on that space, which is something that your typical hierarchical website sitemap never shows. And it also kind of gives you a feel for the information spaces, so that you get at a glance kind of what a really high-level templatized wireframe would look like on a sitemap. So then, to bring that to life, here's an example of a wireframe. And this one is made, you're not going to be able to read almost anything up there because it's that big home and start screen, you scroll to infinity. But it's made using objects that are for Windows 8, so it's all correctly sized and whatnot. So that's great when I think about designing a variety of different platforms. Is that sometimes you come upon Windows 8 where you can only have so many different sizes and shapes of things. It makes it a little easier. But this was an actual wireframe I did in Acture, and you can maybe see at the corners of things some little lightning bullets that show that there's some interaction behind those elements. And the reason for that was to explain to developers. And that's one nice thing about Acture, so I'll definitely plug that one too, is something you want to use if you're working with developers a lot. So even if you don't go to a full prototype, you can at least show some basic interaction like I did on here. So on this one, the environment I was in was sitting down at the Microsoft Discovery Center down in Bloomington, or General it is, and I was sitting at a table with a Microsoft dev and with a client developer, and I would crank these out, throw them over to them, and they would develop them right there, show them with me, and I'd tell them what to tweak. And so that kind of environment is great for Windows 8 development. If you're trying to do it in a more classic handoff sort of environment, it's probably going to be more problematic. But I think at least we were able to prove that we can use old-fashioned wireframing techniques to still do something as new thing that was remade. All right, so it's Wednesday, right? So I think I can try one, I guess. So I just wanted to throw this in here because I was trying to find wireframes that I've done from the past. I don't think this is anything earth-shattering, but it's kind of fun to look at. I've got a wireframe in here that I did from in 2001, almost 12 years ago exactly. And I was trying to find stuff that was farther back that we'd done it in the .coms that I worked at in the 90s, but I think that's all on the hard drive of one of the computers I have in my storage locker. So we'll have to settle for this. And so someone earlier was saying that they worked at Wells. I worked at US Bank, and this was kind of wireframing we were doing at US Bank in 2001. So it should look pretty familiar. To Bridget's point, so look at that, we've got use cases, we've got screen codes, we've got error conditions and field definitions down at the bottom. Because guess what, I was embedded in a team and there's devs. And so that was how we wireframed back then. And it's interesting to see that those techniques are pretty much still the same sorts of ones we use now. We're just using more sophisticated tools like Acture. This was, of course, Visio. All right, so I want to end with some questions. Just, we don't necessarily need to talk about them all, but I thought, when I started really thinking about wireframing, I still have a lot of questions every day. I've been doing these kinds of documents for 15 years. And so some of those questions I think are ones that might be interesting to chat about, or just might be ones that you might want to take away and think about in your own practice. So first of all, I was doing a little research and kind of Googling around a little bit. I started typing in "are wireframes." I got to that much, and the first predictive search was "are wireframes dead?" And so I thought that was a nice sensational kind of question to start with. And so I started reading around a little bit on people's ideas. I think most people who are saying wireframes are dead are people who either have blogs that they want to promote or are trying to get their event into South by. But it did kind of make me think a little more and realize that I do ask myself a question all the time, like, do we need wireframes on this? And because I estimate client work constantly, I'm always pitching business, I'm always trying to define what the size and cost is going to be for the work that my team's delivering. And so I'm constantly being pushed on that by people at the agency, especially account managers. Do we really need to do wireframes for all that, or any of that? Can we just do design comps? And so I asked myself that question a lot, and at first I was like, well, no, absolutely not, we have to do wireframes for everything. And then I kind of thought about it, and back when I started wireframing, we did do wireframes for everything because it was like 1998, and this was also brand new, and we were trying to get our arms around it and just make sure that someone was considering the user, and this was one of our tools to do it. But nowadays, I think my answer is no, we don't need to always wireframe. I've had some great success sometimes just sitting down with a visual designer and letting them kind of mock some things up, giving them input. And we're ready. We're not working with the development team necessarily in those sorts of ones, but we don't necessarily need all the detail. We can add some annotations on a separate page. And that works just fine sometimes. So I kind of came back to that question, why do we wireframe? And it's a different answer now than it used to be. And I think that for me, one of the most important reasons to wireframe, though, is that design is a process. It's not a deliverable. And this is something that I've really had to push on in agencies I've been in, because a lot of the more traditional agencies who've gone from traditional to digital think of only the deliverable. They think of the big idea, we're getting paid to come up with something brilliant. And that's not really the way that interacting needs to work. That might have been the way that it worked if you were doing a billboard or a TV spot, but it doesn't work so well if you're doing interactive. And so, to me, wireframing, even if no one ever sees it, is a process. And it's an important step in that process that helps us move forward, because it's a tool for us to advance our thinking. And so even if we aren't showing a client wireframe, if we're just jumping to comps or something, I'm still going to encourage my team to do them even if they're just sketches. So then I kind of came on to question, well, when do we wireframe and when do we just prototype? And so, in an environment like Abby was describing, there's a nice kind of linear path that you can follow, but sometimes it makes sense to just jump right into that prototype. And I think we're moving more toward that overall as an industry. And I think that's a good thing. I tell myself that. It's kind of hard to get used to. And so another question I just kind of came upon is is wireframings really, are they requirements? Are they artifacts? Are they things that we really do want to have signed off, and if anything changes, we have to go back and change them to update it? Or are they really something that fulfills this part of the process, and then you move on and changes are documented elsewhere? And all I can come to an answer for that one is the favorite one for UX. Depends. Or why not, so that's kind of like, why not just design code? And that's a different, subtly different question. This is something I deal with all the time at agencies, is that it's just easier to just design it or code it, except that we don't necessarily have designers and developers who are thinking from a UX perspective, who know what good usability really looks like, and who are taking into consideration all the right factors. So what I've been doing is actually cross-training our designers, our visual designers, the ones who are interested into UX fundamentals. And likewise, I've been trying to hire UX people who have more of a design background. But that's a slippery slope too. I just hired a really stellar UX person, and that search was hard. I got a lot of applicants who came in for a senior user experience architect position with what looked like 10 years of experience, but really was 8 years as a PM, or 9 years as a PM, and 1 year doing some wireframes. And so that's something that I would just kind of caution everyone who's in UX field and really loves and breathes and sleeps UX to keep in mind when you're interacting, or especially if you're hiring or if you're considering hiring an agency, really test their cred when it comes to UX. So I have a design challenge idea for everyone, which I think is pretty common these days. But I guess my kind of closing thoughts on that one is, this is maybe a little contentious, but I think that UX will eventually go away as a solo profession, or at least still dwindle into just a few specialists. Because I think that user experience and what we do is something everybody should be doing who works on the kind of things we work on. And I think that that's the evolution I'm seeing. Is in the 90s, people were amazed to think about the basic logic of a wireframe when you presented it to them. Whereas now, I think visual designers should understand UX 101 and 201 for that matter. And I'm seeing more and more stakeholders who get it. There's still a lot who just know not to be dangerous, but I think that that's where it's going. So I wouldn't wager a guess of when it will be that UX kind of fades away because everyone's doing it, but I think it'll be within my lifetime. All right, well, that might have been a little random, but hopefully it gave you something to think about. Any questions? Yeah.
This question's for you and maybe the others spoke too, but when you're building out maybe a more high fidelity wireframe, have you worked with clients who provided you with a style guide and their branding guidelines, and what have you found to be really useful? Because I've been working with a lot of vendors, I would just want to know what would help provide them guidance so they can have a consistent branding experience.
So when you get to that high fidelity point, you definitely, anything and everything you give us, we will consume that. So, I mean, that's one thing that I think a lot of agencies don't do so well, is just ask for the fire hose, because I always build in time to take in as much as possible. So give us your brand guidelines, give us your style guides, give us any kind of examples that show them outside points to different websites or different experiences you might have that exemplify them. And if you have other design documentation or prototypes, wireframes that have been done that are great, share those as well, as long as you've got the right MSA in place. Do you guys have any other thoughts on that?
Not
It's more of an agency
That
question.
was great. My last position at Proficient, we called it our knowledge transfer. And I always think we should question when an agency doesn't, kind of ask for a little bit of time to do that. I think sometimes agencies just need that time because they don't have the time. They take their own time to figure out what the style guide is. What's also really helpful is if one of your senior designers actually sits and walks them through how the style guide works. Just a half hour. I think it's really valuable.
And I think agencies are afraid to ask for that time and to put that budget in up front. And that's something that I've pushed to change a lot. And I think we've been pretty successful. And so that's something too, is just anticipate there will be a little time. That if you're hiring an agency, discovery is important, but discovery isn't just about them getting smart, it's about everyone getting smart together. Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to move back to my introduction, and basically the whole kind of gist of what happened with the wireframe adventure was, basically my boss, and he got it. The guy he was reporting to, again, just saw this as sort of a delay, kind of an unnecessary thing. Oh, you want to see the class, you're doing some pictures, how nice. When we have it, when it's going to get coded, and finally, my boss is cutting between. He wanted to do the right thing, because finally this kind of came to me and said, well, can't you just do this in HTML? It's like, because I'm both kind of visual and technical, I developed my own way of HTML prototyping, which is kind of, now I find out this has kind of become common. I've been workshops on everything. It's cool if you can get it out fast enough. But, your question up on that slide, why not just do design code? I mean, obvious pitfalls for that. But what we found, again, because they didn't really let me play in that, persona and kind of early UX process, I just had to get mileage out of like throwing something up onto a rough web page. And since we have a pretty strict brand guideline, it's not too hard to throw in some high fidelity stuff at some point too. But we really got a lot of mileage out of just having those interactive prototypes. You just kind of dead surface somewhere and you get comments on that. It's a real double-edged thing. It's in a lot of trouble. It's all the wrong expectations in people's minds. I need to finish writing requirements. Once the prototype can be done, so I can see what I need to write. I get all this weird feedback. But we have, again, we just were never really allowed to do the wireframing, and so, the HTML prototype kind of came along and bridged that gap between sort of the client, requirements and the engineers who really had no idea how to do anything use the UI.
My feel for that is that if it works, that's great.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to pull up one of those programs and annotate the heck out of something every time. That's definitely valuable. I'll always advocate for that if possible. But if that solution is working, that's awesome. You might want to try to capitalize on it then and see what opportunities you could have to, even if you just show like one quick annotated sketch of one of those pages to show the additional value that you might be able to provide, just try it in little bits and bites like that and see how it goes.
Well, again, with Abby's thing about getting rid of the buying and all that kind of stuff, I really would like to push back and try to get more kind of storytelling and kind of persona work. Maybe, just some generic ones at the very least, just throwing that out completely. So I think the empathy part is really...
If you don't have personas and the ability to do full-blown personas and research and everything that takes, one thing I found that's useful is just to do a task analysis exercise. And usually you can do that if you're knowledgeable enough in the subject, you can probably do it yourself or with some minimal inputs. And that's just starting to write down all the different things from the user's perspective in their kind of frame of reference that they'd be doing, and then start grouping them. And whether you take it any farther and start associating them with different screens and functionality, or just have that list as something you can show or use for your own purposes, that at least starts infusing more of that user thinking into it. And then if you ever do have the opportunity to do a wireframe or 3, you start assigning some of those to it. It's kind of like doing stories, but at least more at a more kind of granular task level and something that somebody can easily consume to give a little additional context. Right, so did you want to open up to a broader discussion or?
Anybody wants to jump in? I mean, it's worked for us, and it's kind of out of necessity. I'm not sure if it's the best approach or not, but it's, it gets the job done. But I just kind of wonder what I've been missing. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if we could insert some of this stuff and see how well it works now. Maybe the people I work with now are a little more enlightened about this stuff. But again, I have a lot of trouble with developers getting this too. It's like, well, why don't we just go to it? It's like these requirements just magically come out of nowhere. And if you don't have a good analyst, who knows how to really translate all that stuff? In our world, they sit on calls for months, gathering up disparate, wish lists, and they have to boil it down. And then, a lot of times it just gets thrown straight to the developer at that point.
Do you have a specific process you use, like rational or anything, or agile, anything?
We're pretty heavy waterfall shop. For the most part. That's when you're working with a big technical silo, where a lot of heavier work is done. We're building these lighter one-off things, and we just really have no documentation.
Yeah.
There's no process.
So when I worked at U.S. Bank, we used the rational unified process, and so I, on my own time, documented how you do user experience activities in rational unified process style diagrams and everything, and then I gave them to our rep people, and then they suddenly started training people on how user experience fits in, and suddenly we started getting more traction to do what we really wanted to do. But it was kind of playing their game. But at least there was a game to play there.
Yeah, that's good.
So I would disagree with you regarding the UX gonna die. UX is a form of engineering and it has a lot of different aspects to it. So this is just new technology, but the technology still will need architect to figure out and engineer to build it. So I think it may evolve, may change, may more, but it has to accommodate the need of the ever-changing technology. So that this aspect.
I agree, although I think that the role of having departments of people whose sole responsibility is UX is going to cease or dwindle. And it'll be the engineers and the designers and the business people and the marketing people who will all be sharing in the responsibility.
Well, that's ideal.
It sounds utopian to me, but
that's what I would say.
I think it's a worthy goal, no doubt. And I think that kind of gets back a little bit to Abby's idea about getting those people all in the room, identifying who the heck is going to actually be able to say yes or no on this thing up front, and figuring out who really is driving that thing, making sure they stick around, and getting the developers in earlier too, just to get that reality check and get everybody invested. And then they actually, it's like your little picture of the ice cream cone.
I think you're both kind of right. Not to play middle row person, but I think the idea that everyone should be involved. I think we all agree that everyone should be involved. Do they want to? Do they know how to know? And so I tell any person that asks me about what's it like to be a UX, because I think there's a lot of people trying to transition into this field right now. What is it like? And I tell them, if you don't have the mind of an educator, this is going to be a real struggle for you, because half of your job is explaining to people why they should care. So for me, when I do a workshop, that's what I think true UX is. I'm facilitating a process. I'm bringing those things together, but everyone should give that input. So I think it should be more where you're that educator, ringleader, but everybody's feedback is coming into that one thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking about how the education part of workshopping. When I am looking for a skilled UX practitioner, I look for the skills with the tools, I look for good design sense. But two soft skills I always look for are being an educator and doing that. And I think anybody in UX has to do those things, because you'll be forced to try to, and so you better be good at that. Yeah, definitely. And storytelling, I might add that as the third one.
I would also recommend Toastmasters. I know it doesn't seem like a UX thing, but because it's, I think unless everyone in this room is going to have a point where they're getting up in front of a room and explaining, selling their story or telling their story, and the better that you can do that, the more articulate you can be, even though it's not part of your job, the farther you're going to go. It's just, it's different. It's how it is. You know, maybe it's something that you didn't want to do initially, but I found that the most successful people can do that. Maybe they're not even the best framers or designers, but that's the part that helps you push.
Hey, and this is your forum, IxDA, and a lot of other organizations as well, of course. But you know, this is a platform for people to get up and try these things out. You know, have a good discussion. You know, throw their ideas out there. I kind of want to go back again on you know, you said something about people, you know, getting people invested who are interested in this. You know, that really hits a nerve with me because a lot of sort of people who came in a long time ago, been in this job for too long, they came in as brand designers like, I wasn't hired to do this, I wasn't hired to do that, I don't code, I don't, you know. So I'm trying to get them kind of motivated to, you know, not only get with new kind of web techniques, technical side, but also just kind of UX thinking, so that, you know, more and more, you know, involved in this, and there's less of a specialty, I guess. I don't know. I don't really see it happening that well. I think it's a controversial idea. You know, it's a good discussion point. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out how I can do this in-house, you know, try to get through, you know, explain the ROI to the people above who may or may not want to hear it, and again, kind of see it as a
So your problem is that
road bump in
you're
the
not
process.
given enough time to do the work in the process? Is that your problem?
There's nobody even knows how or cares to learn. This is the problem. You know, it's just like you're so busy just kind of doing the day-to-day production work that it's just like, you know, it's just extra stuff. And then I think getting the developers kind of up to speed too with the idea of, you know, pieces of work, you know.
So I assume you never do usability testing.
We have no labs, so for me, I actually go out and just the branches with my little camera and set it up and show people stuff. So can you?
Because that was another thing, the technique we used back at US Bank. Again, I wasn't working on the internal facing stuff, so I feel your pain because we'd see how terrible the internal things were, and we could never get any traction doing anything about them. But to try to get more buy-in for work on the external facing things, all we had to do once was pick a system that people internally use, like a payroll system, and we threw it up in the usability environment, and we got a couple people to come just for 15 minutes and try to use it in the usability perspective, and it made some converts in the higher ups.
Yeah, they're getting it little by little.
Keep preaching.
Yep. Anybody else? Sure. Okay, well, in closing, again, I'd like to thank our speakers and our host, Kodo. You have an awesome space here. It's really, really nice. And we'll have this back sometime. See you guys around. And again, our ongoing sponsorship to Thomson Reuters is appreciated, and you know, keeps these things low cost or free. So, and to all of you, again, we hope to see you again another meeting sometime in the future. We're a fun group. We have some pretty fun happy hours on the off months, and then also try to bring you some of this more serious design discussion as well. Hope that this is worthwhile in the industry. So, do you have a question?
Are the PowerPoint slides going to be posted, or I saw?
I need to talk to the speakers about that, but yeah, I mean, I think if they're open to it, you know, I didn't ask Michael's permission yet, but you know, we're going to see what we can do with the video, if it's any good, and definitely try to get some stuff up on SlideShare or some other similar platform, perhaps, something like that. So even with IxDA.cities.org,
We also have an email sign up there. If you want to put your name on there, we'll let you know of any upcoming events and then any resources that come out of these.
Yeah, I mean, we collect names and emails on Eventbrite, and we have to be real careful about that because if we just blast out stuff, people get kind of offended. You know, there's some who just don't really appreciate that. So I think we're working on trying to figure out how to get a good list of kind of opt-in people who really who are interested in following.
Yeah, so the
Won't
only
be
thing
annoyed by us.
The only thing you'll get there is just alert to the next you guys. That's all. The only thing we'll send you.
Yeah.
And if there's anyone here that's not a member, it's free.
It's
Go to IxDA.org and sign up for the actual membership.
Yeah. Now, I evangelize this at work because only recently Wells has actually brought in some CX interaction designers in the Twin Cities. It used to be only in San Francisco and Charlotte. Now we've merged with Wachovia. And again, these people have typically been in the internet services group and front-facing stuff. So it's only new in the inside. And I reached out to a few people. I don't know if anyone are here. Didn't recognize anyone. But anyway, a couple of them tried to sign on to IxDA.org, and for an experienced, design group, this is embarrassingly poor site. It goes down a lot. They were asking me for help, technical help, and I was like, man, I don't know. I know they have trouble with it, so please put up with it. It's really worthwhile organization. Again, if you can get to one of their annual events, they are fantastic. We're going to be in San Francisco in 2015. Next February is in Amsterdam. They've been in Toronto, Dublin, Boulder, Savannah over the years. So if you can get out to one, it's a great event. It's a great value. They don't cost very much. Top-notch speakers, a lot of fun stuff. Fun activities. They kind of push the boundaries on what UX is, and this Midwest UX group too. They really rocked it in Grand Rapids. I couldn't believe how good that was. They came away really charged up about that. So definitely consider going to Indianapolis next year. This was formed by a bunch of IxDA and UXPA people from Columbus, and it's a growing conference. It's really worthwhile checking out. So again, thanks everybody. It's great to see you all.